Chapter 4 My Little Brother. If you think I'm crazy, you should see my brother. All our family is just like that, you know. I'm kidding. He is a man not so open-minded as I am, and I never have asked for his permission to write about him. So I'll never tell you his name. Sorry about that. He is just my brother, okay? I am proud of him, and you will soon know why. Before I had my daughter, it was him I loved most in the world. I wonder if he ever knew about that. But I know him very little. He was 10 when I went to the north and I left my parents' house for good. And we had little contact since then, which I regret. I wasn't visiting them much on my vacations. We didn't have any Skype back then, not even a cell phone. Just a simple phone set was an attachable luxury for most of us. Maybe if I hadn't left him, if I continued the same relations with my brother, he may have been able to avoid many troubles both he had and brought us all into. He who thinks I was touchy should know my brother better. You have not seen the real touchy ones. And God forbid to offend him. He had shown his exaggerated resentments early. When he was just 5 months old, he already was able to detect the slightest notes of reproach addressed towards him. Like some of us grumbling at him for pooping in his linen. We didn't have any disposable diapers back then. Everything had to be washed, and we didn't have a washing machine either. And here we go. He would frown, amusingly curve his mouth, and begin to cry. I was struck by this. Later, my daughter was never even close like that. And since then, my brother always has been this way. With him, I learned early to watch my mouth. Once he was about 13 years old, he didn't talk to me for about 2 months for some of my careless phrases. I had to apologize to him. I've scribbled a page on him and I still don't know where to start. I want to write both a succinct and compact chapter about him. And on topic too. He is 12 years younger than me. I would never know how it felt to have an older brother who was sure that he had every right to bring his little one up per his, what is peculiar for teens, extreme ideologies and with a very low sense of danger. Thus often subjecting both himself and his brother to unreasonable risks. I was sculpting some personality out of him. I would never let him cry to begin with. He was born to be a real man after all. I would never allow him to show any weakness or signs of fatigue. I taught him to ignore any pains. Once I jokingly lashed him with the twigs of nettles, but he only reacted with a laugh in response. And he only was 5 years old. Once my dad sent me to our summer cottage to bring some beans that had been collected. The 5 kilos of it. But it still had to be sorted out, which I hated. I took a 4-year kid with me. We walked 5 kilometers. I had motivated my bro that after that we would go to the park so he would ride his favorite pedal-operated cars. For that, though, he had to sort beans out first. He didn't like that and made a scene, grizzling like hell. But I was unrelenting. The moment beans were sorted out, we'd take a commuter bus back and then to his precious park. And I went inside the hut, leaving him crying outside, and buried myself in a magazine. His cry had subsided, and I looked out to see what he was doing, and there he was, sitting under the sun at noon and sorting out the beans. He had done it all. What did you think you were doing to your little brother, you fucking Dr. Spock? Whenever I remember this, I have it all flip over inside me. Knocking down the kid like that. In my defense, I would only say, though, that I had complied with all the promises I had made to him. He had a really good time riding those foot-powered little cars he loved so much until he had enough of it. Of course, I thought that all I did was for his good. But methods. Was it serving good to him anyway? I was so convincing at educating him to always defend his dignity, honor, and everything that it only brought him trouble. Us too, but a lot of trouble he brought to himself first. He was still 5 when I got drafted. He was 10 when I left them for good. When we were horsing around like crazy, you know the boys. The furniture in our apartment would collapse and fly to pieces because of us. Our mom, after work, tired as she was and upset with us, would scream at me like, "He's a damn kid, but you're not. You are fucking over 20. At least you are the one who is supposed to have some brains." Well, I had known. I mean, zero, zip, nothing. The Soviet army was a tough thing. I mean, it was brutal. This was, like Foreign Legion, where you had yourself forcibly herded to. The prison was the only thing that could have been worse. Sure, you could get adopted there too, but for anyone with some overblown sense of dignity, it was like living in hell. I never told him anything about the army, and he wrote me a letter about that when he got drafted. I don't remember this letter of his, but this reproach in it I do. That was his rebuke to me, and I should have told him that the army was a quintessence of the very Soviet social system. It was a closed system, and as any closed system, to preserve itself, it was structured to create within itself some self-regulatory mechanisms. And this fucking system, due to the extreme scarcity of its positive motivational feedbacks, such as vacations, check passes for Sundays, women, salary, none have existed for most of them. It was based on violence. Everything was based on violence there, including jokes, dirty cracks, and rituals. And very specific army subculture was born, which officially was called Code Red, or just hazing. By the way, I never myself ever heard any new jokes told in the army. That was one of the many costs of this closed system. Officers generally tried to control this phenomenon and regularly, as a warning to others, put those that have been taken off their belts to jail. But smart ones among officers, however, secretly use this very effective system of violence to maintain order. Any recruit feared the old file much stronger than the most ferocious officer there. An officer in some ways was like a safety valve, some military disciplinary regulation enforcer, the guarantor, defender who kept any specifically aggressive old conscript in check. The first 6 months of the 2 years were torture for the most, if not all, 18-year-old recruited kids, especially in the first 3 months. The surgeons who just had gotten out of the hell themselves and had their new shoulder loops now, and perhaps for the first time, some power over the others in their life, were running real wild. The old files were bad too, but those who have served a year and just stopped getting their asses kicked all the time were even worse. Those were real animals. And once in a while somebody would attempt to escape this hell. That's what I should have told my little brother about the army. I was sure he would always cope with the extreme situation. He didn't. At about when he was 15 or 16, he got stronger than me. I felt it when I fooled with him around. And you know, from this book, I was a hell of an undefeated fighting machine myself, and I'm paying with my eyes for all these now. With just one blow to my shoulder, for the seconds he could turn my arm off so it just wouldn't work at all. I felt as if it was fucking paralyzed. How the fuck he could do that? I never taught him that. What a fucking commando or something he was going to become. And there some big bruises would be seen on my shoulders for a month or so. His fists got bigger and heavier than those of mine. Sure, I was pretty much positive that nothing would happen to him. He'd handled it. Well, it did happen. Being mad, my brother stole a bike and drove it out from that fucking military base. Fuck you all. I'm glad that he at least had not killed with his AK-47 his fellow soldiers who had just beat him up. He didn't take any ammo with him, and that probably has saved him his young life. Well, he had turned up in Turkey, straight from the top secret restricted area he had been serving to a potential NATO enemy country. He never asked for any political asylum, and never was going to. Russia now was an officially free and open country, and the uncontrolled violence in its army was a real problem, and Russia was admitting that. So he turned himself in. FSB was going over my parents' house, and I was summoned in the north to testify for him too. I must say that at that time, I mean in the mid-90s, the FSB, ex-KGB guys were nice to us all. They all were courteous, correct and polite. And poor. The oil prices were down as never before, and the government had little money to pay its employees. I remember myself sitting there. I had just renovated my newly bought apartment and inspecting their ragged walls, felt superior over all them, glancing down at their cheap soft Korean television set, sitting on an old table, and two VCRs, one on top of another. I had no contact with them ever since, but I also heard a lot of stories about them guys running wild on the street, especially under Putin's rule. And my dad, he was a pen pusher too. There were no social networking back then, so he was putting his precious thoughts into his notebooks. And FSB guys rummaging my parents' apartment found those notebooks of his where my pop, about 20 years before this country turned around toward China, with his fruity expressions wrote about how Russia would get under China. That confused explanations my dad was giving were not overly convincing to those FSB guys when they asked what the hell was that supposed to mean, pointing their fingers to my dad's notes. I'm telling you, they were nice guys back then. And in jail too. As my little brother says, they treated and fed their prisoners well. He served his time in the disciplinary battalion. I knew, even from my time in the army, what kept me in check, by the way, that all preferred to trade in jail for disciplinary battalion, or a disbat as we called it here, and would go for more crimes to go to jail. The only but a significant advantage was that you had no criminal records after having served disbat. Any prison looked like a resort, a spa, compared to a disbat out here. So my little brother came out of all that shit a completely different person, and we've never fooled around as we used to before. He has seen more in his life than I have in mine. We have never discussed this with him. He doesn't smoke, neither does he drink much. I always loved him as an older brother should, and now I began to respect him. When he thawed out a bit, he got married. He has opened his own business. He is very determined. And very independent too. Very few stand guys of his kind. He is also an artist, like our late Uncle Bob you have read above. He has a nice son, who looked like his grandfather to his delight. And an A student, just like his grandfather used to be. It's a shame he did not live that long to see that. Sure, he would have been glad to learn that he had his genes passed on all right. This he never could wait on us the assholes. Anyway, I'm proud of my brother. By the fact that he, no matter what, is making his way to success. And he works for Google.